Well, Mr. Peasteak, which I think you must be, because I don't think there would be a Mrs. Peasteak. Could I be wrong about that? You want to know what historical figures, events, movements, or books I feel have been ignored or underemphasized in the public education of young people. Here's a piece of advice about asking a question. Try and narrow it down a bit. Try and make it more incisive. Try and make it get under my skin. You give me too much to choose from, you're likely to get either everything or nothing, and I certainly can't do everything. I'll try not to do nothing. If you mean in the United States, I think that the study of the founding of the country, the emergence of the United States as the world's first and only, still only, secular democratic republic, federal republic, is terribly understudied these days. The likelihood that there wouldn't ever have been a revolution if there hadn't been a inter-imperialist fight between England, Spain, and France, the likelihood that it could have been just a rebellion of colonies wanting to hold on to their old English privileges, the extraordinary odds against there being an Enlightenment revolution sponsored by people like Thomas Paine and Thomas Jefferson, who really believed that the United States should declare not just for its own rights, but for the rights of all men, which is the great breakthrough, based on the writing of John Locke and other Enlightenment figures, is the most ignored and underemphasized. Instead, we get happy stories about George Washington crossing the Delaware and matters of this kind that are later replaced by the stories of Parson Weems about George Washington being a moral hero and a sort of Superman, which don't show the grit and the grain of how revolutionary our revolution was. If I could change one thing, it would certainly be that. And the great book to read, since you imply that I should mention one, would be Theodore Draper's book, A Struggle for Power, which is a very good history of the germinal events without which the American Revolution couldn't have taken place or would have taken a different form. Scariot, which is a somehow suggestive name, asks me from what he's read or she's read. It seems I initially supported the intervention of the United States in Iraq and Afghanistan. Do you believe that it's had, he asks or she asks, a positive or negative impact on the growth and exposure of Islamic extremism? Also, given that the countries are still plagued with problems many years after the initial invasions, what direction do you think US foreign policy should take now? Implied in that is the idea that the influence on the Islamic world is created by us, or by our intervention. In fact, in the salient case that you mentioned of Afghanistan, the Talibanization of Afghanistan, its takeover by a very vicious, cruel theocracy that ran Afghanistan into the ground and also invited Al-Qaeda as a partner into the country to help to destroy the patrimony of Afghanistan, to blow up the treasures of Bamiyan and the Buddhist and other non-Islamic statues and museums in the place, was only because the United States was disengaged from Afghanistan. It's very important not to forget that. As with Somalia, as with Afghanistan, as with Saudi Arabia to some extent, these tendencies arise because we're not looking. And it's certainly true that Osama bin Laden used to say that he was not afraid of the United States because he thought it wouldn't fight, not because it would. And so I think a lot depends on one's being able to say that he was wrong about that. In other words, it's not the case that we are disliked because we resist Islamic imperialism, the attempt to create a new caliphate, a new Islamic empire in the world. It's much more likely that we'll be despised if we don't take a stand against it, and they will believe that this hastens the day when this great new empire will dawn. So there's no choice but to resist it. And it was a choice that was to some extent forced upon us, but I think we should recognize it when it arrives. Board Greg asks, in a rather laconic way, where I get my news. And I would say that I was once quoted in some online dictionary of quotations. I've never been able to find it again. My son pointed it out to me as saying that I became a journalist because I didn't want to rely on the press for information. It was partly true. I get most of my information from other writers, other reporters, other journalists based in other countries, or journalists based from other countries who are assigned to Washington. What they tell me is all the stuff they couldn't get into their own paper or past their own editor, and that's my main source of information. I rather pity people who have to rely on the output of the journalistic profession to be informed. And then there are one or two websites I sometimes look at, but generally speaking, I'm old enough now that people will send me things that they think would interest me, and from all over the world. So that's what I do as soon as I flap through the New York Times in the morning, which I do so as to be sure that I know what other people think is going on or what the news is. D. Roberts, 1982, says that I've stated the litmus test for the Obama administration is Iran. How is the president doing in this area? Well, litmus test is, of course, a cliche. I hope I didn't use it in that term or that voice, but it still wouldn't be untrue. There are two senses in which we're in confrontation over Iran. One is it has a regime that's illegally trying to acquire and to conceal its acquirement of thermonuclear weapons. So we'll soon find out what our most ancient worry will look like. By our most ancient worry, I mean maybe our deepest modern worry. What will it be like when people who have a fanatical apocalyptic ideology get hold of messianic weapons? Well, we'll soon find out what it's like to have to be nice to people like that, because they're driving their country into bankruptcy in order to produce this program, and lying to the United Nations, to the International Atomic Energy Authority, to the European Union, and to everybody else about the ways in which they've been doing this. But they've been caught lying repeatedly. They make a profession of lying. That's the first thing. This, in other words, the evidence for what we believe does not come from some overworked CIA. The second thing is that we have every reason to believe, and as someone who's visited the country, I would want to tend to confirm, that Iranian public opinion, especially among the young, is overwhelmingly anti-theocratic and sympathetic to the United States, and